John Keats was a romantic poet, born in London on the 31st of October 1795 and died from tuberculosis aged 25 on the 23rd of February 1821. The poem, When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, was written between the 22nd and 31st of January 1818, but was published posthumously in 1848. This poem goes a little bit like this. When I have fears that I may cease to be, before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain, for high-piled books and charactery, hold like rich garners the full ripened grain, when I behold upon the night-starred face, huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. An important part of this poem is the change in tone. The tone of this poem changes in a way that is similar to other Shakespearean sonnets, where there is a shift partway through the poem where the view changes from just being about Keats and starts focus on the rest of the world. Keats does this turn in tone in an interesting way, in which instead of having the change in the tone at the start of a line, he places it in the middle of line 12. He separates the tone with a hyphen and makes it more emotional because it's as if he's suddenly coming to his realization that all his desires that he's been talking about for the last 11 and a bit lines are all pointless. This is the change in line 12 of unreflecting love, then on the shore. The structure of the poem. This poem follows a fairly strict iambic pentameter. The rhyming scheme that this poem follows is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. The poetic devices featured in this poem. Imagery. Imagery is a common poetic device used in the writing of this poem due to the amount of time Keats spent describing how things looked in really beautiful but also realistic ways. Alliteration. Alliteration is when the consonant sounds are repeated in a line. An example of this in the poem is, of the wide world I stand alone and think. Personification. Personification is when a writer gives human qualities to an inanimate object or an animal. An example of this device being used in the poem is, their shadow with the magic hand of chance. Similes. A simile is a poetic device that compares two different objects by their qualities to be able to understand their meaning better. An example of this being used in the text is, hold like rich garners the full ripened grain. Consonants. Consonance is a poetic device in which the same consonant sounds are repeated through a line. An example of this device being used in the text is hold like rich garners the full ripened grain again. It uses the consonants again. Words that enhance the poem. Teeming. This word in the line, referring to his teeming brain, refers to his fears of not being able to get all his thoughts and ideas down on paper before he dies. Gleaned. When this poem was written, this word referred to the very rigorous and often demanding task of collecting leftover crops. In this context, Keats uses it as an analogy to writing poetry. Trace. When Keats uses this in the line, and think that I may never live to trace, he's bringing forward his fears that he might not live for long enough to write all the beautiful stories that could have an impact on the world. The themes of the poem. A heavy theme in this poem is nature, and although this is an extremely common theme in romantic poetry, Keats illustrates that natural writing is essential to his very being. The theme of nature is given a darker and more grittier theme in this poem, because Keats is using nature to describe his own fears of mortality and everything that he will miss out on doing before he passes on. What experiences from my own life can I associate with this poem? For my own experience, I can say that this poem can be taken both ways. One, in which it is from the person who is afraid of dying's perspective, of not wanting to die before they are able to get out all their thoughts and ideas. The other way I can look at this poem is from someone outside of the person coming close to passing away and not wanting them to die because you want to continue to hear them and what they have to say. Does this poem still contain a strong message that is relevant to people in today's world? This poem contains a strong message that I think is still extremely relevant today. I think this is because a lot of people aren't happy with themselves, as they are constantly comparing themselves to celebrities and social media stars and putting them on a pedestal. How does this poem reflect the Romantic era? This poem reflects the Romantic era with themes that are very typical for Romantic era poetry subject matters. I think that this particular poem, although having a common subject matter for the time, was able to bring a fresh new spin on the formula by shifting the themes to be darker and more serious.